Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give everybody a few more minutes to log in and get settled, and we'll begin the webinar in about 2 minutes. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Historical Data 0, Refreshed Data 1, the Football Association wins with post-event survey overhaul. A few logistical notes before we get started. You'll see 2 different ways to communicate with us throughout the webinar, the chat box and the Q&A box. Please use the chat box for all technical issues and the Q&A box for any questions related to the content of the webinar. With that, I'd like to introduce Zoe Dowling, our SVP of Research here at Focus Vision, and Phil Russage, Insight Officer at the FA. Zoe uses her extensive research expertise to help clients best supply Focus Vision's technological solutions, and Phil's role within the FA is to research and present the voice of participants as well as that of fans and visitors at Wembley Stadium. At this time, Zoe and Phil are going to turn off their cameras and jump right into the presentation. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Rachel, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for spending this bit of time with us today. As Rachel's already said, we're going to be talking to Phil from the Football Association. We'll learn more about that in a moment, and really looking about how they took and refreshed a long-standing post-event survey to, I think, great effect. So I'm really excited about this conversation with Phil. What I would urge you is, we'll have time for questions at the end, but please do put in questions as we're going along. I'll be monitoring them. This is a discussion. This is literally just a discussion between Phil and I. So please join that discussion, put in your questions, and I'll pose them as we go through as well. So to kick off, Phil, you've already seen us on camera. This is Phil and myself. And I think to start this off, Phil, tell us all, because I think we're no matter where we're from, but not least if we're not from the UK, what is the FA?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. A great point to start, I suppose. Entirely understandable if you're not familiar with the FA, what it is. Again, another acronym to add to the list that you no doubt have about. So the FA is essentially the Football Association. So we're the English Football Association. If you're in America, think kind of US soccer. Germany, it'd be the equivalent of the DFB. We're the national governing body for football, the custodians of our national game in England, football. We're a not-for-profit organisation. So every kind of penny of profit that we make, we invest back into football. I think one of the really nice statistics or numbers that we have is that every week we invest over £1 million back into the game, back into football within England, which is fantastic and really rewarding to be a part of that. But yeah, we're that custodian of the game. So we oversee kind of the grassroots football game. So whether you're a 5-year-old girl who's getting into football for the first time, just looking for a kind of a leisure activity or something to do with your friends, all the way up to if you're 75 and you kind of want a keep fit activity, you want to take part in walking football and stay social, we're kind of that custodian of the grassroots game. Equally, we kind of oversee the education of the volunteers and the facilitators. So we've got a great picture of an FA qualified coach on the screen. So the coaches, the referees within the game, we oversee their education, ensure they're delivering the best experience for their participants. We oversee the senior teams, so when you see the England squad running out of the World Cup, that's kind of essentially part of the FA senior teams through to those development teams when you're kind of under 15 years of age, 16 and so on. And then there's, I suppose, that elite end of the game. So we oversee the oldest cup competition, football cup competition in the world, the Emirates FA Cup. That's our competition. We run that. Equally, we're kind of asset owners, which is something that Zoe alluded to at the start, with Wembley Stadium and St George's Park, two facilities we have in England. So England's home ground, essentially Wembley Stadium, we own, we operate, whether it's for our teams running out and playing a game, or equally if we have the likes of the Spice Girls who are playing a concert here in the summer, Ed Sheeran, the Who, Adele, they're equally our customers. They play at Wembley Stadium. They arguably fall under part of kind of those FA customers. So yeah, it's a very broad spectrum of things that we cover. But yeah, it's a big job. It's a big company.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, I've learned something there. I didn't realize that you were non-for-profit and the investment back, and that's actually really cool. So a really interesting organization then to work for with a number of different, I was say, roles that you play, and I'm sure that brings sort of challenges and brings us to what you do and what you do in Insights. And I have to ask, is your office in the dugout? And of course, dugout's different here in the US. I think baseball dugouts, whereas we've got a picture here of the football dugout.
Exactly. So we've got our senior manager Gareth there at Wembley. That is the Wembley dugout. So I mean, this. I think the purpose of this question being on here is this is essentially what my mum, love her as much as I do. Kind of the first thing that she asked me when I said I got a job at the FA is, "Oh, brilliant! Are you going to be kind of behind Gareth on the bench, kind of advising on those points?" Sadly not. I'm not kind of trusted with those big decisions, but I do get to work on fantastic, big, impacting decisions from inside the business. So my role, so I work as part of the Behavioural Insights and Business Analytics team. So essentially another umbrella term for what you might have as a research and insight department. We're a team of 9, which is fantastic. And it's kind of a new, relatively new and growing team. So I think thinking back around 5-6 years ago, we were the grand total of 1. So Ross Antrobus, who now heads up the team, he was the sole member of what was then Research and Insight. We have grown now to 9, which is fantastic. And we're ultimately in place to help the business make better and more informed decisions, making sure we're making customer or I suppose intelligence-led decisions across all of those assets, whether it be for the senior squads, whether it be for the branding at Wembley Stadium, or whether it be about those grassroots games that we're facilitating and putting on. So it's great in that as a department, as our team, kind of as research, we're really valued within the business. We're looking that our CEO understands and kind of has a background with using research. So we're built into most kind of decision and decision-making processes, which is fantastic. Everything from kind of standard measurement and evaluation, kind of your classic brand tracking, and then those product and concept testing pieces.
Mm. So that's interesting. Just going to the point around how, if you said, and I heard this right, so 6-7 years ago there was a team of 1. There was 1 person sort of fulfilling this role for the entire organization, and now you're up to 9. That's a lot of growth in a relatively short period of time. Do you think that shows the growing importance of insights? Like, are you finding you're going through more layers of the organization, or how do you think this has changed? And why?
Exactly that. So again, not being in the room when Ross was offered the job, those 5-6 years ago, I think the original remit of the team was very focused. So primarily to help boost participation within the grassroots game. So that was working with our grassroots division. And then also to ensure that our hospitality, our Club Wembley members, so we've got within Wembley Stadium, there is an allocation of seats, around 18,000 seats, that are kind of a debenture, a hospitality offering. So members would buy their seat for 10 years at a time. that second part of his remit was to ensure that we're doing what's right for the members and ensuring we're getting renewals and improving the product for them when they come to renew. So kind of, I suppose, starting off with two core objectives, albeit kind of service the rest of the business. From where we've gone to 9 now, there are lots more avenues and channels within the business. We now have, or we've always had them, but not necessarily feeding an insight, the commercial team, so kind of understanding the value of our assets and help supporting and acquiring new commercial partners. There's the marketing team itself, so what are we putting out in terms of branding for the Emirates FA Cup, the England brand. So I think if anyone's familiar with the England team and the World Cup in Russia last year, some fantastic new activation and ideas around what the Three Lions brand is. So there's that side. We've got our communications division, so making sure that whenever we're going to press with any news or equally responding to any questions that come in, we're making kind of comments or statements that have kind of statistics and numbers at their core, so that we know that we're kind of on solid ground. It's not just kind of an open ad hoc response to solve the issue and kind of firefight. Actually, we have numbers behind this. This is what we've got. And again, the Wembley ops team, so the people running Wembley Stadium, equally the kind of less, maybe they won't forgive me for saying this, but the less glamorous roles, so the HRs, the finances, and so on, in supporting those internal requests from kind of employee satisfaction. So it's gone from focusing in on two very specific divisions within the business to making sure we're actually serving everyone, and that research is embedded into everyone's, I suppose, decision-making process.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fantastic. I think this overall is what we're seeing, and where we want to be with insights in all organizations, is that it's not just this kind of ad hoc or start, like it started there with, hey, we've got a specific problem, so let's get somebody in to deal with it. It's not just, you've got the data to back things up, to troubleshoot across all divisions and all departments. So that's really fantastic. I think you've already started to talk about this, but just moving into the types of data that you collect, and is there something that you specifically focus on, Phil, or do you touch on all of these different areas within the business?
Yeah, so partially jumping the gun on this, but I think as kind of alluded to, it is a very broad spectrum of data we collect. I suppose there's the slightly more organic, might be the right word, it might be a terrible word. I'm going to say organic anyway. The organic data, so the stuff that kind of naturally kind of flows in. So whenever a team registers in an affiliated league, we know we keep a track on our number of team counts in the English game, who the kind of club officials are, so those secretaries running the clubs. Likewise, when members sign memberships to our Club Wembley Hospitality product, as I was mentioning, kind of segmenting them and kind of doing modelling of them. So that organic data that kind of naturally feeds through just from people entering their details and how that offsets. We've got kind of 90,000 teams within England that are in the affiliated game, and about kind of 2,300 members as part of Club Wembley. So is that all? I'm going to say again, organic data. But then there's, I suppose, the other stuff, which is maybe more typical for wider businesses. So I suppose like customer experience data. So whether you might have been on an FA coaching course. So to become a youth coach in England, you need to kind of take your FA level 1 coaching course. So reviewing the satisfaction of that course. Did it work? Did it give you what you needed? How did you find it? Is there anything we can do to improve it? Likewise, more customer experience stuff. You might have played in an event called the FA People's Cup, which is a free five-a-side tournament in England. No matter who you are, there should be a category for you. There's 18 different categories. So whether you're under 14 or under 16 years of age, whether you're a male veteran, so in terms of being aged over 35, walking football, which is kind of a variation on the game where you're not allowed to run, kind of tailored towards those that have maybe had injuries or reaching a slightly older age. And then equally the disability categories as well. So kind of reviewing how that fits together, those customer experience pieces, so we can inform those. I suppose another category of type of data is the brand perceptions pieces. So I think this is something that I didn't really appreciate it before coming to the business, is that England, as a football club, England senior squads and equally the FA are a brand. So how are we perceived by the public, which we essentially serve and are part of us? Do they like the FA? Do they dislike the FA? Are they proud of the team? Are the values that we would hope the team to showcase and be proud to buy into, are they perceived? An interesting piece that we did at the start of this season, so our kind of lead competition, the Emirates FA Cup, which is a cup competition which pretty much any club, in any men's club within England can enter, through from your Manchester United at the very top down to kind of your 7th tier team can enter. And that's been going, it's the oldest cup competition, football competition in England. It's over 150 years old. But are we engaging with our kind of youth audiences as much as we used to? So kind of exploring how the brand sits with those kind of 16 to 24s. Is there anything more we can do in the activations, how we broadcast and so on to get that greater affinity with them? So kind of the Premier League is a separate entity, kind of comparing ourselves to how we stack up against the Premier League, the Champions League, other premium football competitions. And then I suppose the final catch-all might be that product development piece. So something that's kind of hot off the press, or we're looking to do in the coming months, is our provision for kind of female disability players. While we've got great cup competitions such as the People's Cup and the Disability Cup, those ongoing season-long provisions aren't necessarily as strong as some of the other kind of areas of the game that we focus on. So if we're to improve that, talking to lapsed players, or equally non-rejectors but non-players of female disability football, what more can we do to kind of create, whether it is kind of a session style that runs so that we can engage with them and get them playing the game that so many of us all love. So yeah, some very broad stuff there, and I suppose that links into Wembley Stadium as well, and that's that customer experience piece, and kind of understanding who's visiting here. We've got a nice picture of some fans at Wembley Stadium, and so that again is a big piece that we do. I oversee lots of the work around Wembley Stadium. I oversee a lot of the work around the grassroots participants, and that's kind of my day-to-day grounding, my day-to-day focuses.
Okay. So I mean, again, it's really great just to reinforce just the vast amount of data and inside data that you're collecting as an organization and coming in from different sources, the organic as well as the primary. You're asking people the CX data, the brand perceptions and product development. So to go to the Wembley, and one thing I would say just for non-British listeners to our webinar is that Wembley Stadium is such an iconic British football and English football ground, and it's a real thrill, I would say, as a Brit, when you get to go there for whatever event, be it a football event or seeing the Spice Girls, I'm sure. But so the operations of that and having a good experience whilst you're there, I know, Phil, from when we've been talking, that's paramount. It's something that you as an organization are obviously very focused upon, and one of the reasons we're also here today is to talk about some research that you do around the fan experience when they visit Wembley Stadium.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of forget me and my kind of FA England centric mindset that Wembley Stadium might not be familiar to everyone. For, I suppose, a bit of context, it's a 90,000 seater stadium just in London, in a place called Wembley. In Brent, it is the second largest stadium in Europe. It's the equivalent for scale. I've got loads of these really kind of arbitrary numbers that kind of everyone has in their back pocket for when they're in the pub on a Friday with their friends. But it's the equivalent, putting on an event at Wembley is the equivalent of running all of the performances in the West End and all the performances in Broadway at the same time. On one night is the equivalent of doing one event at Wembley. It's kind of massive in scale. This is the most tedious of all the kind of facts that I know is and it might help get a scale for it, it might not. If you wanted to fill Wembley Stadium with liquid, it would need 7 billion pints of liquid. So kind of, I think that sounds big, I don't know, but it's a massive stadium, state of the art. It opened in 2007, and understandably, we want to ensure that people coming to the stadium are getting the best experience that they can. Obviously, we can't always impact on the result that goes on the pitch, but everything else should be within our control. Through from kind of those experience points, so whether the Wi-Fi works, whether the food and beverage on offer is what they expect. I suppose the operations side of things, so getting people in and out of the stadium, getting people away from Wembley. We put on kind of 60 trains an hour, 1 a minute essentially, to get people out of Wembley and into Wembley on an event day. I suppose another thing in data collection is just actually understanding who's coming to games and can we get them to come back to games. It's always been a bit of a barrier that you can get someone to Wembley and they'll watch an England game, but will they return for this year, next year, 5 years down the line? Kind of, can we get that repeat customer? And then the other thing is the fact that it is a big stadium. It's a great asset, but fundamentally there are commercial obligations and benefits to having it. So it's full name Wembley Stadium connected by EE, a telecoms provider in the UK. Leveraging that, so kind of collecting data to share with potential commercial partners, but equally fulfilling commercial partners' obligations about data they want to collect. All of this is wrapped into something we'll talk through, which is our post-event survey. So after an event at Wembley that we kind of control, so sadly, we don't control the Spice Girls. That's not our remit. But let's say the FA Cup final or any England game, we ask those that attended how their experience was, and that's our post-event survey, our post-event tracker.
And that track has been running for quite a long time. Probably, it sounds like, if I'm piecing two and two together, is maybe from the start of when you were a team of one within the organisation. Is that fair, or is it prior to that?
Yeah, pretty much. 2012, looking back in the data files, is when we first kind of started collecting any data. It might have been a bit ad hoc before then, but essentially the tracker has been running. We've got a read on every fixture since August 2012. So kind of getting on for 6-7 years now worth of data. So yeah, it's been around for a while. So
that's a long time, and that's a lot of data. And that brings us to the next point. You had, let's see, if you did the refresh last year, if I'm right. So you had good 5 years worth of data, and that's amazing in terms of the historical, going back and tracking and seeing how things, are you moving the needle or not? Yet you decided to do a refresh of this survey, and with that, actually risk the historical data, and the comparability. So what prompted you to do it? What prompted you to undertake a refresh of this survey?
Good question. I suppose anyone who's run tracking studies for kind of a year, 2 years, kind of 3 years plus will know it's really easy for them to become bloated in terms of the question numbers. So kind of month on month, one question might be added and then it never gets taken off, and then the person who requested it leaves the business and you don't know why it was added in the first place, the objective of what it was there for, so it just remains there. Then you add, again, that cycle continues. So it was just a big, unwieldy survey, to be honest. It was largely the same core set of questions as was there in 2012, just other things tacked onto it, which took it realistically kind of towards the kind of 10-12 minute mark, kind of 40-50 questions long for certain people, depending on how they route through. And I suppose if we compare ourselves as a research team and as a business to where we were in August 2012, so if I'm thinking back to around the start of 2018 when we started this process, we as a business are different, the FA is different, our knowledge of how Wembley operates is different, because naturally we've had 5 years worth of running the stadium events in that time. And the personnel within the business are different. So the people who maybe initially briefed in the project may no longer be here. I was taking on this project. So my predecessor in the research team Again, they maybe had different objectives or were working to different stakeholders. So it just needed, we're in a different place, and it was about suiting that. I think with the change in personnel, both from kind of our research team and the stakeholder team, that engagement with the project and the outputs was getting increasingly weak. So I suppose the stakeholders were maybe more detached from the content of the survey, why the questions were included, and maybe we weren't actually making use of all the effort and all the questions that we were actually including within the survey. So it's about, okay, how can we make this a good use of time and equally informing your decisions around how we operate Wembley or what's happening on an event day?
Was there, I mean, and that makes total sense, and an incredibly sensible thing to do, given all those different things that you've mentioned, like, the changing business, the organization was different, your understandings of how you're running the operations of Wembley was different, the people are different, and a massive, I think, aspect is, are your stakeholders engaged with the data? Is the data being used? And I think there's two things I'd say. Is not just the effort that you as the research, the insights team are putting into collecting it and analyzing it and delivering the outputs, but also the respondents. If we're not asking people questions that, and the participants, again, that word's used interchangeably, but if we're not making good use of the data, it's not a good use of our participants' times either. So I think all of those things make a lot of sense. The question I have for you is, was data comparability, how is that viewed? There's often fear and reticence to change because of the data comparability. What were the conversations that you had around that?
It's a good point. I think the reason why the survey had kind of never been questioned before, or always just kind of ran event to event, was to an extent probably kind of now due to the fact that we've grown to 9 team members. We were shorter on staff numbers at that time, and it was potentially easier to kind of just keep running. It's ultimately doing a job. We have a KPI metric from the survey, which was kind of overall event experience, and that was reported kind of all the way up to kind of the top level, to the C-suite and the board. So people knew that figure kind of needed to keep tracking. We needed that number that was used, and it was a good indicator actually to the performance of the Wembley ops team, the operations team, or the marketing team, and so on, about the event. So that was like a key number. That was potentially a risk factor, as in that we need to keep that. Will it change? What will happen if we change it? There was maybe a bit of apprehension about kind of fearing losing questions that no one had looked at for a couple of years, just because the second you phrase it, we're going to cut this, then everyone's immediately like, no, we need to keep it just in case.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is acknowledging, when thinking about the refresh process, I did try and maybe start refreshing it around, so our start of the season is August. So August 2017, maybe had a try at refreshing it for some of our autumn fixtures. And I came at it with that approach of, what do we want to keep out of this survey? And then naturally everyone was like, we need to keep as many key things as possible. That really didn't change much. It didn't change the questions we were included. We maybe lost 1 or 2, but it largely stayed the same. Instead, it was about, I suppose, and leading on to this point of how approaching it, almost starting it as a new project entirely, and kind of going, we're starting with nothing. We know we've got 1 to keep, which is our KPI measure, but what are your key objectives that you'd hope to get out of this survey or this post-event wrap-up?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I actually moved on to, how did you approach it? Because it was really nice. You segued into how you started. And the first thing was, approaching it as a new project. That's an interesting, because I think a lot of the time when I've been involved in this, it's not taken with that kind of fresh perspective. It is that okay, what can we call, and then the fear, like you said, keep it just in case. I think we all have that, even if that question has not been used for 3 years, but maybe we'll need it. And so that it's almost like survey question FOMO. If we don't have it in there, we might miss out on that particular data point. But I think what you did was, taking a step back and thinking about it anew, maybe was probably a really helpful way on getting perspective on those questions.
Yeah.
So how did you, yeah?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, it was, I suppose we then built it up from that. So we knew, I suppose, myself knowing how the old data was used, I knew personally which questions needed to be kept. And then in asking kind of each of our stakeholder groups, so our Wembley Ops team, our Wembley marketing team, the England marketing team, just getting their kind of 2 or 3 key objectives that they each wanted to include. We could ensure all of those were covered. Some of them might have been legacy questions that were already in it. Most of them were new questions entirely. And then we essentially had permission to scrap everything else that they said they didn't really want as part of it.
Okay. So it was really going into different departments, finding out what they needed, and then getting some reassurance that they're still going to get what they need, and maybe better, I would hope.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, part of the things that they were asking about, and again, it was about engaging with the new stakeholders. So the people who were in the business in 2012 had potentially moved on, most of them. So giving back ownership to those stakeholders of, we're writing the survey for you, what are your questions that you want to be in it? Again, just helps with that buy-in of the results at the end. And so, yeah, it just helps give them ownership, knowing the questions are going to be used, knowing that they're relevant. And I think in kind of saying, we'll cover this off for you, just to make you aware, some old questions such as these won't be tracked, but that's fine because we're focusing on these core ones. Then was a much easier conversation, and one was like, that's fine, I've told you my 3 objectives. Actually, those are the questions that maybe I would have challenged and pushed back on removing 6 months ago. On reflection, ignore those, focus on my 3 that I've flagged now.
Okay, that's great. And I know as well as so really looking at the questionnaire and making sure that it's giving you the data that you need, that's usable, removing questions that aren't providing anything. I know that there was also, just from our prior discussions, that there was some thought also about the respondent experience, participant experience, and wanting to revamp the questionnaire so that it was a better experience for them, less dropouts, and so again, hopefully with a knock-on effect of better data. Can you talk more about your thinking around that aspect?
Yes, so I suppose one luxury that we have here at Wembley Stadium when we get people in is, excluding our hospitality members, we've got essentially 72,000 people through the door. Kind of, if we're talking about ticket buyers specifically that we can recontact, maybe kind of 15 to 20,000 people that we can send a survey out to. It means we've got a great starting sample base. But as with any kind of long bloated survey, we were getting dropouts. Again, you get kind of the data quality issue of the long surveys. And so it was just a fact that the survey wasn't an enjoyable or fun survey to complete. And I'm sure people will be saying, is there ever going to be a survey that's enjoyable to complete? But it was about just making it easier, more dynamic, more engaging, making sure our question structures were right in terms of the flow, so that actually it does only take 5 minutes to complete. Again, thinking back to 2012, the vast majority of people would, or more people would have been completing it via desktop, which means longer questions would have displayed better. Certain types of grid style would have displayed differently. Now, acknowledging the fact that people will be kind of picking up our email and getting the prompt to take the survey on their mobile means that it needs to be just a bit sleeker, a bit more dynamic, a bit more punchy in the words or the word count. Can we really refine that a little bit more? So it was all, I suppose, the first survey wasn't designed with maybe even a participant perspective at all. It was just kind of let's get the key data we need, and that's the core objective. In coming through to a refresh, it was about, let's get the key data we need, but actually, if we're going to take this opportunity to do the refresh, let's also make sure that it looks and it runs as good as it can from a participant perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's essential, and it's oftentimes something that we don't think about, or maybe don't feel and think that we have the luxury of doing so. But ultimately, looking at your questions, thinking about it's a mobile world. People are, and I can imagine just the way that you're inviting them through your email invite, how many responses that you get are mobile. Via the mobile, okay, I'll quickly click this link, and so shortening the length of the survey, but also making sure that the questions display well on the mobile device, and also using, and I know we talked about this before, we're using different types of interactive questions just to make it more visually engaging and enjoyable for them.
Yeah. I was going to say it's moved on from what was a lot of drop-down questions and kind of simple basic grids to a bit more dynamic buttons and carousels and so on.
Yeah, no, that's great. So how long did this refresh take, the whole process?
It was quite a long one, I suppose, in that, I suppose, from the first point, we arguably started it in August and kind of didn't really move until January, when we thought, let's wipe the slate clean and build the project up again from scratch. We identified that KPI metric that we had to keep, so that overall experience. And so that's where a lot of the time went. So it actually, I suppose, writing the new survey again took, I suppose, a month of stakeholder interviews, getting our new objectives, scripting the survey into kind of your Word version, and then onto the Focus Vision platform. That in itself took a month, but because we had our KPI metric and we wanted to ensure that we did have comparable data across that specific metric, we then ran what was a slightly longer survey, a slightly more complicated survey, for 6 months. So for kind of across 6-7 events, we kind of routed people through one of two ways, kind of either seeing some of the old KPI questions or some of the new KPI questions, just so we had kind of a parallel run of data, so that we knew, yes, we tweaked the question order, yes, we actually tweaked the question scale, we made it broader from a 5-point scale to a 7-point scale, just to give us a better idea of our top and bottom ends. But so yeah, that 6-month process was just ensuring we had a really robust base size, so that we could then look to say, this is our new score on our KPI metric. We're at kind of, let's say, 55% top box. What were we at before? Okay, if now we've shifted from a 5-point scale to a 7-point scale, kind of multiplying the trend and how that differs, we can validly compare our future events on our new kind of, I suppose, we'd say more accurate and more friendly survey back to what we did collect in previous years anyway. So I suppose a month to actually do it and get it sorted, but actually 6 months of just collecting data about 6 or so events. We're obviously a bit more sporadic in when we can collect data. We can only collect it after fixtures, but as it fell, that was about 6 months long.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so actually, redesigning it, but then let's go and do our parallels. Let's see what data we're losing, but also let's see what data we're gaining, and how comparable are anything, the ones that are comparable, and is the data the same and changing. So let's move on to the final question I have for you, and I'm just a shout out to people on the line. If you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A box, because we're going to be coming up to questions shortly. But Phil, what was the outcome? How did the data change? And I think more importantly, how has it impacted the business and engagement with the survey, and how and are the insights that you're collecting from this post-event survey impacting the decisions being made going forward?
So I suppose the first and biggest success itself is the data and the findings of the survey are having greater use within the business. Mm-hmm. So whereas before it might have been just that overall experience score was reported on board reports and so on, and that's really the extent of it. Now we're doing more to understand what's driving it. There's greater buy-in from the stakeholders to know their scores, to look into the sub-metrics. Okay, how is, let's say, the fan zone outside the stadium, how did it perform? What are they expecting to see come through in various comments and verbatim? So just having that buy-in, kind of, I suppose, feels like you're not wasting your time in just running the survey and it's just a dead report. So that's fantastic. The data itself, I suppose, did change. We shifted our key metric from a 5-point scale to a 7-point scale, and we also switched how we reported it from a mean score to a top box percentage score. With that, we got, I suppose, a greater degree of separation at our top end for what kind of makes an excellent experience to what's a positive experience but not fantastic. And so we could then run things such as drivers analysis to kind of understand, okay, what are the most important factors for driving that overall experience? Where are we currently delivering high versus low in terms of overall satisfaction against their importance and so on? So we could do more with the data, and I think could inform better actions off the back of it. I think from a respondent view, or like a mechanics point of view, our response rate, or I suppose our dropout rate reduced quite a lot. I think I just had a look on it yesterday just to check on this, but we were at about 35% dropouts, just kind of making sure we're asking sensible questions and asking them in a more dynamic fashion. We're now down to about 20 to 25%. So it's kind of keeping an extra 15% of people in the survey. Great for the sample size, great for getting those comments that come through. Length of the survey came down partly because we naturally tweaked the survey, but I think we were asking more relevant questions than we ever have done before, and we were doing it in a way that actually was taking less time. So I think now our survey is averaging about 6.5 minutes. So it is a quick survey. Hopefully it's engaging, it's an interesting topic, and that, again, all benefits the data.
Yeah. If I just pick up on that one, there's a couple of things that jumped out for me there. One, though, is kind of interesting. So you're shorter, your length of interview is 6.5 minutes, which really doesn't feel like a lot. And a lot of time I think, well, what can you actually get from a 6-7 minute survey? But what you've said there is that there's a lot, and it's allowing you to be very focused on these are the metrics that we're looking to monitor and potentially shift in the positive direction, and then using different kind of techniques like the driver's analysis to dig into, well, what's going on, what's impacting that top line score. So I think that was just the point. It's like you can do quite a lot from a short survey. You're getting a lot of value from a short survey.
Yeah, I mean, just to say you can get loads from, 5 minutes is, as people will know, is long enough for a survey. 6.5 minutes, you can get a lot from it. I think as much as anything, just making every question easier to answer or easier to read and understand goes a long way for respondents not having to spend 30 seconds reading and understanding a matrix grid of questions. Then that's saving you kind of 20 seconds on your response time, and it keeps them more engaged in that question. If we're asking fewer like open-ended comments that realistically we weren't or might not necessarily have used before, so we might have kind of 5, 6, 7 open ends but not actually use them or action anything off them, then why are we asking that? That's a time, kind of a long time for people to answer. It's a time, can't think of the right word, but a poor use of time in terms of responding. So you can get loads done.
So that feels like the combination between the way that you're asking the questions, the way it's been displayed. So using interactive features, I know you use the Decipher platform, and really making use of those interactive question types in order to just make it easier for respondents to answer and give them a better experience. But then that's kind of benefiting back to yourselves in terms of, well, this data is helpful and it's keeping them go through, and you're able to do a lot of things with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I just love, and before we go on to questions now, I just love the and this is the key part, and this is why we're all here, and why Insights departments are around, is engagement with the rest of the business and helping them actually make the decisions and informed decisions based on the data. So the fact that the engagement you have with the different stakeholders, the fact that you're looking into why. I mean, that jumped out at me. It's like, okay, so we're seeing X. Well, can we explore deeper as to what's going on. And so that kind of engagement and really, I think it sounds like the value that it's delivering has grown massively.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
All right, so we're up at questions. I know we're getting a little bit short on time, but let's take a few. Actually, on that one, I see a question here. Have you gotten feedback from respondents? And if so, has it proven to be a more positive experience for them? And then a third bit to this, are they incentivized to participate?
So I suppose answering those first points, in terms of going out to participants or tacking on a question on the end, like how did you find the survey and so on, it's not something that we've done. I think what we do is upfront in our intro text and the emails we send out, we have kind of if you've got any questions, please contact us. We've got a generic kind of research inbox. From that, and just, again, we respond to any of those queries that come in by sheer weight of kind of poorly typed and rushed kind of comments that come through into that inbox. So emails that are saying, what waste of time, you're asking the wrong questions, or why are you asking me about X? It's completely unrelated. Just from those sheer weight of kind of frustrated respondents getting in touch. Thinking back to the last survey, I don't know whether we got any at all. Thinking back to before the refresh, that's when we'd get kind of maybe tens through, just not necessarily calling any action out, but those complaints. So I think to that extent, that is an indicator. I think from our own experience and our own expertise, we're happy that it's better, but it's not to say that we can't always open this out and see whether there is a more positive experience for them. On the incentivization point, we do kind of incentivize with a prize draw for it. As much as anything, just to, I suppose, say thank you for their time. We appreciate that they are giving up their time to take part in it. So again, it's just a prize draw, an opportunity, but it is incentivized.
Okay. That's good to know. Let's take one more question before we close, just looking at the time here. So just going back to around the stakeholders, how do your stakeholders use the survey results to increase KPIs for the happiest responders? So I think you'd said that, you've changed it. So in one of your key one around overall satisfaction, you've gone up to the top 2 box. How do you look to, and do you look to kind of shift the needle there?
Yes. So a really good question. So if we're thinking, and again, I'm not sure whether whoever's asked this is familiar with the kind of the approach for drivers analysis, but fundamentally that can help us prioritize what we're doing well and what has the most impact. And with that, I've kind of got a graph in my mind, which I will inevitably fail to verbalize, but kind of in the top right-hand side of this graph would be labels called strengths to maintain. So they're the things that we are doing well. They're the things that we do well, have a big impact, and arguably we're achieving for those top-end individuals. They're called strengths to maintain because of the fact we need to ensure that these things are working. People are nudging already at that top end. So we are a bit of a ceiling with those real top-end customers as to whether if they are rating kind of 7 out of 7, 7 out of 7, we can't nudge them any further. It's more about moving those middle passives up into that same top boxes where our most positive people are. But it's about not neglecting or forgetting the fact that we need to maintain those strengths that are delivering for those happiest respondents. I think the other really interesting thing we do, which isn't to all members in this survey, but is to our kind of top rating kind of Wembley members, so our hospitality, where we've got a bit, we get kind of circa kind of 5,000 responses through to this survey, so it's not possible for everyone. But when we do get people who have rated 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, or kind of key metrics, we go and we give them a call if they've given their details, if they're willing to talk again, and we thank them for that. And so it's, again, it might not be a big thing, but it's increasing that one-to-one relationship with those customers. Again, it's not often that you'd receive a phone call from the FA, or equally from if it's a Club Wembley account manager team, just to say thanks, like, we appreciate you had a great experience. What did you like? Again, learning from that, equally taking any feedback and advice. in the same sense, for people that rate 1, 1, 1, 1, and want to kind of tell us more about why everything's shocking, we'll do the same process, but just come at it from that improvement angle instead.
So it sounds like, if I'm trying to visualize this graph, you've got your core strength to maintain. You're absolutely right. If there's a 7 out of a 7, there's nowhere else to go except maintain. So really focus and be laser focused on, hey, we're where we want to be. We want to keep this. But equally, it's what are we underperforming in? But we also know that is, I'm guessing here from your driver's analysis, that you know that this is something that maybe, if we were able to push this up, to nudge it up further, then we're really going to help move the needle in terms of overall satisfaction. And so you're focused on that area too.
The thing that maybe I didn't allude to about that driver's analysis is, the smart thing about it is it shows how important each of those factors are in that KPI score. So whether it's something that, if you're going to improve one thing, improve this, that has the most impact on that score, whether it's food or beverage and so on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm looking at time, and I think we're out of it now. Phil, I'll just say from my side, this has been a great conversation. I've learned things. It's always fascinating to hear about the challenges and how also insights are being used within an organization. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
And over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Zoe, and thank you so much to you and Phil for joining us today. As you said, it was a great presentation, a great conversation. Unfortunately, it looks like we have reached the end of our time together. If there were any questions that didn't get answered today, we will follow up soon, or you can email us at webinars@focusvision.com, and we will respond to your question at that time. We hope you enjoyed the webinar, Historical Data 0, Refresh Data 1, the Football Association Wins with Post-Event Survey Overhaul. We hope to see you at future webinars. Have a great day.